Katoa. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Clarissa Hurst from the Financial Services Council, and I'd like to warmly welcome all of you here today for this afternoon's FSC Connect webinar, Economic Harm Making a Difference at Work. Now, this session is a little bit different to some of our other webinars that you might have tuned into. This one's more of a workshop, and it's going to be something that you can really listen to, engage with, and then hopefully take something away that you can implement in your own workplace relationships. And we've got a real life case study here today that you'll be able to learn from. So we're really excited, and we really hope that you'll get some valuable strategies and tools to utilise out of this session. So the wonderful team at Good Shepherd New Zealand are running this workshop today, and they do some incredible mahi in the economic harm and family violence space. And they were key supporters of the FSC's It Starts With Action campaign that we ran earlier in the year. As they will no doubt mention very shortly, economic harm is a form of family violence, albeit one that doesn't often get recognised as such. But this does make it all the more insidious because it goes unnoticed so often. So we really like to draw attention to this issue, and I really encourage you after this workshop to, once the recording becomes available, we'll pop it up on our YouTube channel later this week. Please share it with colleagues, friends and family. It's something that has the potential to help so many New Zealanders out there, and you never know who might benefit from learning about this important topic. Right, so without further ado, I would like to warmly welcome Nicola Eccleton, Beryl Brogden and Katie Duncan. I'll be back at the end of the session to wrap things up, but for now, Nicola, I'll hand over to you. And if anyone in the audience has any questions throughout the session today, please just pop them in the Q&A box, and Nicola will try and get to as many as she can. Over to you, Nicola.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Riss, and thank you for having us, and thank you for all your support helping us get the word out there about this issue. So economic harm is behaviour towards a person that controls, restricts or removes their access to money, resources or participation in financial decisions. There are different forms of economic harm, but in our work we very much focus on the family violence side of things. It is experienced through all socioeconomic groups, cultures, ethnicities, ageless. It is genderless, but because it is a form of family violence, it does affect more women. So because this is New Zealand, this session begins with a who you know story, and Katie Duncan is actually my sister. So she used to own a hospitality business with more than 200 employees around the country. And one day she rang me because she'd come across a situation with one of her employees that she was really concerned about. And she had heard me talking about my work, and it rang some bells for her. So Katie's going to tell us a little bit about that experience of supporting an employee who was experiencing economic harm. And Beryl Brogden, who is our advisor for economic security, is going to share her specialist knowledge of what Katie could have done, did do right, didn't do right, and how employers can play a role in supporting their teams in this area. So thanks both of you so much. Katie, we're going to start with you. Can you start by sharing how this situation came to your attention?
Yeah, absolutely. For the most part, it came to our attention via other staff members who the affected staff member had made comments to, and it kind of raised some red flags for them. The staff member, she was incredibly low and withdrawn. She'd made comments to colleagues about things like not having enough money to catch the bus home, not having enough money to top up her cell phone. And as a full-time permanent employee of ours for about 4 years at this stage, it obviously rang pretty serious alarm bells for us that she couldn't afford the bus or a $20 top-up for her cell phone. So that was it. Initially, a few staff members kind of brought it to our attention, and my co-director and I had a conversation with the affected staff member's direct line manager. And we basically made the decision that we needed to have a conversation with her and try to find out what was going on.
So how do you do that? How do you start by approaching someone on such a personal, tricky conversation?
Well, I think most importantly for us, it was about a conversation of who it should be to approach her, who was she going to be most comfortable with, creating a safe space. We made the decision that it was my co-director and I, and just to give a little bit of context, the culture at our business was that we were two female co-directors and we were kind of loosely the company mamas. So we had tried to nurture our staff's ability to speak to us privately and trust us. And so I gently approached her and said, would you just come and have a chat with us? And we sat down in the office around together. We made sure there were no desks in between. We were trying to make sure that we were very much kind of in a safe, friendly kind of approach. And basically we said, are you okay? Because it feels like you're not. And just tried to encourage her to be able to speak to us quite freely about what was going on for her in her life at the time.
So what did you do? And can you talk to us about some of...
I rang you.
Oh. and you know what? That's actually a really, really good place to start. I think in New Zealand, we have our family violence services have come from a place of being refuges in safe houses where women packed up their children in the middle of the night and were dropped off by police. So I think it's really important that people know that that's not necessarily the case. In the family violence agency that I used to work at, it was the vast minority of clients who accessed safe house services. You can pick up the phone to a women's refuge or a family violence agency and just have a conversation. So I think that's a really important thing to clarify. And so after you'd spoken to me, a few years ago, so it's possible there was certainly less support than there is now.
And certainly I didn't have an understanding of economic harm at that time. I think that we may have identified that family violence was taking place, psychological violence was taking place, but we didn't really understand economic harm and what that meant for the employee. So what we found out initially was that she had no access to her own bank accounts, which was what she told us. So her bank accounts that were in her name, she had no ability to access the money in them. She was given $50 a week as an allowance. And one of the first things we did was advance her a week's wages in cash into her hand. We took her to the bank and we worked with her and the bank to change her account, change the passwords, and we contacted the police. Unfortunately, at the time, again, economic harm, there was still very little work that had been done. When we took her to the bank, there was about $8,000 missing from her bank account, and the bank's response was, well, she shared her information. Now, she didn't willingly share her information. She was coerced and threatened to provide access to her bank account. And unfortunately, at the time, the police response was quite similar. She provided the access details to her bank account. So that was an incredibly disappointing response from the institutions that we needed to help us out. But we got her a new bank account. We changed her payroll system. We did the advancing of cash a couple of weeks in a row to make sure that we were giving her the power to make some decisions, because she also indicated to us that she wanted out of the house. And so then we engaged with Aviva, which is a Christchurch former refuge agency, and Aviva supported us in supporting her. And we also, through another associate of mine who is a Samoan social worker with Oranga Tamariki, she gave me the contact details for a specific Pacifica family violence support service in Christchurch. And they essentially came in and took over and supported her right through to extracting from the relationship in the house.
Katie, talk to me a little bit about some of the whys. I know that you have spoken about the impact on your business and the impact on other staff of having someone in this situation.
Yeah, and to be completely honest with you, what I'd like to say is that it was the right thing to do, and of course it was the right thing to do, but there was a commercial impetus. There was a huge impact on staff morale in the site and in the kitchen where the staff member worked. Interestingly, her line manager took it very personally, was quite devastated. Why hadn't I picked up on this? So he kind of went under a little bit over it. Her colleagues were very concerned about her welfare, productivity completely dropped off. I kept walking into the toilets and find people standing in there whispering. So it kind of took over everybody at that site for a while. And we realised, of course, that we needed to step in and support her. The flow-on effect of that was extraordinary. I mean, we could have given out pay rises and not had a response like it from our staff. Our staff took so much comfort and pride from our stepping in and providing assistance. And I'm quite certain that it had a reasonable impact on some of our attrition, because hospitality is has notoriously high turnover, and some other kind of positive results from creating a incredibly morale-based, values-based culture in our kitchens.
When you talk about her not being able to access her bank accounts, what you're saying there is that you are paying a full-time employee who doesn't have access to her wages. And I think from an employer perspective, it's more than a red flag. You know, it's just so unable to be. You can't hide from that.
No, and more than a red flag in that she's the person who's in there doing the work 45 hours a week in a really thankless role. It was as a kitchen hand in a large commercial kitchen, and she was in there slogging her guts out 5 days a week, 45 hours a week, and not seeing anything from it.
Mm. Okay, so Beryl, workplaces, you and I know that workplaces have an important role to play in supporting employees affected by family harm. And also, I think the New Zealand public was probably educated when we had the family violence leave instigated into workplaces a few years ago. And we've heard from Katie some of the impacts on her business. So can you talk to us a little bit about how employers might go about identifying it? And yeah, just to add from your perspective.
Sure. Thanks, Nicola, and thanks, Katie. I think Katie's answered some of those questions in her story, so I'll just kind of reiterate some of those things, really. It can be really hard to tell what economic harm is on the surface. What we know from some Australian research is around 45% of employees who experience family violence in the workplace, they confide in colleagues. So very much like the story Katie's telling. So there's some things that can be potential indicators. They may or may not be specific to economic harm, but they're definitely worth a conversation. So things like not having access to your own bank account, wages going into another bank account, being anxious about getting paid on time, asking for money in advance. Some people may ask their work colleagues to borrow money. Some work colleagues may lend money. Asking for annual leave and feeling really uncomfortable about asking. So it's kind of that being aware when people are asking for things that they're just a little bit uncomfortable, it's not kind of their normal, something out of the ordinary. Ongoing transport issues. So there's a lot around that. People having to get dropped off and picked up from work, not having money to get to work. Access problems, sabotage is quite common. Not having the keys for the car, having the battery taken out of the car so you can't get to work. Partners ringing up a lot, texting, showing up, wanting to know when they're going to get paid. In one case, for example, change of behaviour. So in my family, we have a family member who was unaware they were experiencing economic harm, and he dealt with the money issues in his relationship by working longer, asking for extra shifts, and he was constantly at work trying to earn more money, and he spent a lot of time at work on the phone to creditors asking for money. So those would be noticeable differences. For other people, it might be that they work late because they don't want to go home, or that they don't come in and they ring in sick because they can't afford it, or these other forms of family violence, as Katie suggested, going on for people. Constantly talking to colleagues about having no money, but yet having enough wages that should be able to cover basic needs. People being guilty or defensive when talking about money, spending money on everyday situations. Getting an allowance, talking about only having an allowance in their relationship. Withdrawing from social interaction at work because they can't afford to attend or be there, or their partner wouldn't let them. Those sort of things. But they, like I said, they aren't necessarily all indicators of economic harm. They're indicators that there's some stuff going on for somebody, and it's definitely worth exploring and finding out if they may be experiencing economic harm.
So Katie told us how she approached the employee. So if you have seen some of these indicators and you're a little bit concerned about the well-being of your employee, what's the best way to start?
So the starting point is to work out the right person. So Katie was in a situation where she built relationships with their staff. So in some places that you might have a trained person, or there might be a manager who has a really good relationship with the employee, which would be a great place to start. We know that people can feel like they're in trouble or their job is on the line if they were approached by HR or senior manager. So it's really about finding the right person. And then once you've done that, it's about having a supportive conversation in a safe space away from everybody else, so nobody's, there's no listening ears. And just kind of be transparent. Check in how things are going. And if you're if you're a manager, for example, who often checks in with your staff, it shouldn't be too weird or out of place to check in and see how things are going. And if you need to, reassure them that if they do have stuff going on, that you're here to provide support and that there isn't the risk of losing their job. Take time, don't pass judgment, and know that they are experts in their lives. So even though people have all these complex things going on, they will know what they need to get through it. What they don't know is what their employers might be able to offer to provide support. And because there's a lot of stigma and shame attached, employees may not want to talk about it. And that needs to be okay too. So it's just giving them permission to know that there is support if they need it, and they can always come back later.
We've got a question, Beryl, that says a lot of the signs you're describing for financial abuse are similar to signs of financial distress. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So talk to us about your thoughts. I have thoughts, but I'm facilitating, not answering questions.
Like I said, that the starting place is always to have a conversation. Many people who are experiencing economic harm don't even know it's economic harm. They don't know that there's a label for it. And it may be some other form of financial difficulty or hardship. But as an employer, if it's impacting someone's productivity and their workplace, it's still good to kind of explore that and find out what's going on for them.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's also really important to remember that it's not your job to diagnose what someone's problem is. You are not trained to work it out, and you don't need to. You just need to provide pathways or information about where to get support, time off. Sometimes at work it might be that actually letting someone use the phone on their break or have a longer time to use the phone because being at home on their phone is not safe for them. It's a really good, that can just be a very small thing, is just to provide some time at work where someone can make some calls and reach out for some support. In terms of, I just wanted to touch on when we're talking about who the right person is to speak to, there's a balance of power issue with the person who's your manager. So sometimes I think we think very much about your manager should speak to you. And I know, Katie, that you had a really interesting situation where you were upset that someone didn't come to you because you were the manager.
Well, we had a situation where a staff member that I had a very good relationship with and who had worked for us for about 6 years didn't come to me about something that I assumed that she would have felt comfortable to do. And then she latterly told me that it was because her visa was in our company name. And that was an inherent balance of power that I had never considered. So I'm going out having relationships with my employees, I'm being approachable, but I'm not thinking this person's right to be in this country is based on their employment with our company. And that's just a complete imbalance that never occurred to me.
I think it's interesting because when you think about migrant exploitation, you think about your role as an employer, and your role as an employer is to follow the law and create a great workspace and a healthy workspace. If you're doing all of those things, you just might not be aware that there's a gap. And I think it's a really important reminder that migrants on your staff don't necessarily know all of the support that's available. They don't know their rights when things go wrong, and that they can check in with you about some of these things, or check in with someone on the team. Katie, after listening to Beryl, is there anything you wish you'd done differently or known about beforehand?
I think I just wish that we had been proactive and understood more about what could affect our staff, and particularly our migrant staff, because our migrant staff, I realised that there was quite a general lack of understanding of the rights that they had under New Zealand law that might differ from where they come from. And so I think, as a response to what we went through with the staff member, we created a migrant rights document that went into all of our induction paperwork, and we created a family violence policy document. And it was things as little as pulling out the statutory leave from the Act as its own part in the contract, in the terms and conditions of employment, which is only saying we have an awareness of it. You're not saying we're offering you 10 days leave because of family violence because we're a wonderful company. That's a statutory requirement. But to pull it out as its own paragraph in the terms, and then with for more information, this is where you go, is telling your staff that you have an awareness, that you're a safe place. And I wish we had done that sooner. And instead, we responded to economic harm in our workplace. And I just think we probably could have done it a little bit better. But with the first instance that we did deal with, it prompted a significant review of what our staff welfare policy looks like.
Yeah, great. Couple of awesome questions in the chat. The first one is about gender. And yeah, absolutely. Anyone can experience this. There's no question about that. And we do need to remember that. Our work is mostly focused on women because, Beryl's probably got the stats, but in New Zealand, 1 in 2 women over the course of their lifetime experience either physical, sexual, psychological, or economic abuse. So that's kind of where it is. And yes, men do experience it, but hopefully if you are inputting policies or operating in a way that's inclusive and you care about someone's well-being, that will all help. That this people will get this help as well. And then the other question is, I'm excited to ask Beryl because I know that this is a particular passion area for her, and I know that she's going to struggle to keep it tight. But the question is about perpetrators, Beryl, and what do you do when you're employing someone who's perpetrating abuse?
That's interesting because somewhere in my notes here, I talk about having a policy, not just for people who have experienced family violence, but what about those who actually are in your organisation and may have been causing them? I have been involved in peer support services and family violence sector, and one of the big pieces for me is the way that we engage with people. Language, for example, calling someone a perpetrator when they're a perpetrator isn't particularly helpful because that becomes their identity. So the way that we engage, if we want people to change and to look at their behaviour as something that's harmful and look at the possibility of change, then we need to look how we write things and how we approach people and what we put in place to provide supports for them too. And certainly in working in safe houses and family violence spaces, the woman that we work for there always said, and what is in place for our men, because they're still fathers of our children and they're still, so whilst they do perpetrate harm and something needs to be done there, they are people too. So how we do that is kind of takes a lot of consideration.
Is there places that people can go to when they want to learn more or stop that sort of behaviour? In terms of, we direct people for support when they're on the receiving end, but when they are perpetrating, is there things out there?
Absolutely. So there's stopping violence services, there's family violence services, for example, Aviva in Christchurch, who now work with men. There's Pacifica groups throughout New Zealand. There's going blank on the names of some of them at the moment. what is that one, Nicola, that we've had some dealings with?
Oh, there's Gandy Nevis in Auckland. They work with me, and
there's a lot of men groups and things around, and I think we have some information on our website around who they are.
We've talked about employers not needing to diagnose or be social workers, and support can be about liaising with the right support and getting people to the right support, rather than you thinking that you have to provide everything that yourself. But in terms of if you are in the workplace, what are some good supports that an employer can offer that might be a value add, I suppose, to the external support?
So the first thing we usually start with is to not assume that people don't have support. We often jump in and think, oh, we need to sort this and fix this. And some people aren't ready. Some people are already working with services, and some have really good family and friend support. So a starting place is just to offer them support and let them know it's available. And Katie's already touched on some. From an employment perspective, there's kind of the standard employment law, family violence leave, flexible working hours or working environment, holiday pay being paid out. And if you had a staff member who came to you and was applying for those things, just checking in with them and seeing what else they might need, or if there's anything else that you could do as an employer. Some organisations have additional internal support, such as relief funds, EAP services, support for transport, food vouchers. They design things internally for their own teams based on what they need. There's also practical things like making sure that employers have access to their wages right from the get-go, flagging a partner's phone number if they keep ringing, making sure a staff member feels safe in their workplace. If a partner is stalking an employee, they can be trespassed from the workplace if it's safe to do so. If an employee is uncomfortable going to their car or arriving at work in the morning because they feel someone's monitoring them or something, have somebody go with them, have a security person go. Just provide some basic things like that. If there's other forms of family violence occurring, as Nicola said, family violence services respond very differently now, and it can be as simple as an 0800 number. Just give them a call. They have information on their website around safety planning. That can be really useful without talking to somebody. And our Good Shepherd New Zealand website, we have information about economic harm and healthy relationships. We have support information and contact details for our support service for employers and for employees, so you both can access that for free. We also have relationships with banks, family violence services and hardship teams, and we can work with employees to access those services if they need. The one thing that's worth mentioning, if you are providing some support for somebody, it is most likely going to be a process rather than a one-off fix everything thing. So it may be useful to put a plan in place to regularly check in, engage how things are going.
Katie, does that track with your experience? Was it sort of, take you to the agencies and off you go, or was it a longer term sort of checking in? What was the sort of ongoing support that you needed to?
Well, it was an incredibly overwhelming experience for the employee, particularly from the migrant piece and understanding that things had gone on that she hadn't assumed were unlawful. And understanding that and then starting to get her head around what were her rights in New Zealand and what was her agency. I think that was incredibly overwhelming for her. And so we were helping to extract her from the financial piece, but also the physical violence piece, the accommodation, the creating a community around her, making friends, all of those kind of things actually took a reasonable amount of time. It was on our radar from a regular check-in perspective with her for in excess of 12 months, but not to the point where it was taking an hour a week. It was kind of a 15-minute, every few weeks saying, so let's have a chat, let's have a follow-up. So are you settled where you are? Are you understanding of, what your obligations are in this accommodation? Are you comfortable with you're able to access all of your funds? Just absolutely sense checking that she was safe, and the people who had coerced her weren't trying to come back into the space.
A lot of the things that you're talking about sound like regular things that you would support an employee through, like a bereavement or something. Just to, there's a lot of just regular checking on someone's well-being is checking on someone's well-being.
Well, I suppose it's very similar to, in all businesses in the last 2 years, but I hasten to add, particularly hospitality, where stress and financial security and employment security, etc., were forefront in people's mind. We took it as part and parcel of being an employer that we needed to be monitoring our staff mental well-being through the pandemic. It's exactly the same thing. And I think it was Beryl who actually said to me, if you have a drug policy, why don't you have a family violence policy? Family violence is as illegal as drug usages.
Beryl, how big is this problem?
Huge. So it is a huge problem in New Zealand. So according to some latest economic harm prevalence study unpublished and hot off the press from Dr. Aisha Scott at AUT, 16% of New Zealand adults, which is 635,000 people, have reported they've experienced financial abuse. So that's 1 in 6 Kiwi adults. And also, as you mentioned before, as we know from family violence statistics, 1 in 2 women have experienced some form of family violence over their lifetime. So if you had 20 female staff, that would be 10 of them. So it is high, absolutely. And so the impacts too are significant. So people can be left with relationship and coerced debt and hefty legal fees, especially if there's joint property or children in the relationship. Credit ratings can be affected, which impacts people's ability to get housing, vehicles, and other basic needs. If there's harassment, stalking, sabotage, and interference, it can cause people to lose jobs, have to leave their jobs, or struggle to get new employment, and in some cases, not complete their higher education. There's also the psychological impact on their well-being, which causes their self-worth to be damaged and their confidence with money making and financial decisions. And so the combination of all those things significantly impacts a person's financial security, independence, and ability to move on with their life.
Yeah, and all of those things are just such an impact on people's well-being, their productivity, their ability to concentrate. Yeah, it's a lot. Katie, someone wants to know what you think. So this is a hypothetical. What do you think would have been the outcome had you done nothing?
I hate to think, if I'm honest, there would have been significant physical violence ongoing. That was part of the piece as well. There would have been a completely different quality of life outcome for this person, to the point where one of the people involved in the abuse actually rang me and tried to threaten me, and how dare you? And I think, I'm a reasonably strong kind of person, and I just thought for her to be going home to that level of intimidation and terror, the psychological ongoing impact of that would have been horrific. But had she come out of it somehow without our support, it would have been to no access to her own bank accounts, no credit cards, no credit rating, no money, no 2 cents to rub together, English as a fourth language, and no understanding of her rights. I hate to think what would have happened to her.
I'm just keen for Beryl, I suppose, to give us some more helpful answers, responses. What would you love to see from employers to encourage discourse and awareness?
So some of the things that Katie's already said, specifically around visibility. So, for example, discussing or referring to economic harm during job interviews or induction processes. So people are really aware right from the get-go where the organisation sits. Checking with new staff that they do have access to their bank accounts, whether that's a tick box on your normal form or what that is. Maybe suggesting a personal unshared email address so confidential work email can be sent to them. Highlight the family violence entitlements and the Employment Act and include them in contracts, like Katie said. If you have a drug policy, Why not a family violence policy? And if so, do you have one for people who are causing harm as well, because they're likely to be in the workplace? If you have a staff intranet, you could provide information around what economic harm is, red flags, links to websites like Good Shepherd New Zealand, and let people work out for themselves what they're experiencing. You can work out who might be the go-to person in your organisation. You might have someone who's really interested to kind of take a lead in this space. And there may be some basic training that you could arrange for your supervisors, managers, or HR staff to help them kind of understand a bit more about how to work in this space and how to support people.
I love the idea of, those induction forms where you fill in your tax code and your bank account and you tick your workplace health and safety injuries thing. Having do you have access to this bank account? Do you have control or decision making of the money that goes in here, or something along those lines? Because what I think is what I get excited about is changing norms and expectations. So you're straight off the bat saying our expectation is that if we put money into this bank account, it is your money for you to do what it is that you want with. And if that's a joint bank account, the same thing still stands. We know people share their finances and have joint loans and debts and accounts, but the expectation is still that you are making the decisions about how that money is spent. And even though the person might lie and just tick, yep, I do, you're constantly planting seeds of what is expected in these relationships and what is normal in a relationship. Because the other thing that I think is really important, and Beryl and I know this all too well because we've worked in family violence agencies, is that people don't necessarily want support, or they're not ready to hear that the person who they have been in a relationship with, or who they married or they love, or who is their son maybe, is hurting them. And I think it's 7 times, isn't it, Beryl?
Yep.
So it takes the research suggests that it takes people 7 times of trying to reach out before they can process all of this, get their head around leaving, figure out what they're going to do financially, and then take that step to not even leave, but take that step to actually end the situation that they're in and end the violence. So it is really important that we don't get upset and say, oh, but I offered her support and she didn't take it. We're still planting the seed of what our expectation is of behaviour and our expectation of well-being. And family violence and these behaviours, as someone pointed out, are often just other things, so they can be quite common. So really people have to work through that themselves, and here I am talking, not facilitating, and I apologise to everybody. Beryl, can you just talk a little bit about I'm going to put you on the spot, Beryl. Can you just talk a little bit about our Healthy Financial Relationships Toolkit? I know we've covered this in another FSC webinar, but I just would like you to talk a little bit about why it's really important for us that we present healthy behaviours alongside all of our resources about economic harm.
Absolutely. So we have a Healthy Relationship Toolkit on our website, which we've developed alongside Dr. Aisha Scott from AUT. And a couple of reasons for that. One, talking about money is a bit of a taboo in New Zealand. So couples aren't very good at talking about money, and they tend to do it when the problems arise rather than in advance. So it's kind of something in the preventative space in one piece, but also what we know is people who are often in unhealthy relationships don't know what a healthy relationship looks like. They don't know how to get there. They don't know what you need to do. And so for some people, if they can get ahead of things before things get too bad, actually being able to have a conversation if it's safe to do so. What we say is economic harm isn't always intentional. There are definitely cases where it is weaponizing money and it's a terrible experience. There's other cases where there's unhealthy relationship dynamics that people fall into. Maybe your father always did the money in your relationship, so when you were growing up. So in your relationship, you believe that's your role and you kind of slip into these places. And if that happens, how do you talk about that? So we've developed a toolkit that provides, it's a two-part toolkit. It provides some information about understanding your own relationship with money and how you got to where you were, what your upbringing was around money, right through to how to have a healthy conversation about money with your partner and how to navigate some of those difficult things that comes up in conversations when heightened emotions come up, when maybe you see things a little bit differently.
It also speaks to why we say harm and not abuse. And I think that touches really nicely on that question earlier about perpetrators. There's a big leap for someone to acknowledge that they might be abusing someone, but it's not so much of a leap that they might be harming someone. And I said to Katie the other day, actually, I know I'm harming my children. I know they'll need a therapist when they're older, but I'm not abusing my children. But at some point, there will be something that I have done in their childhood that will have touched their little brains or their little hearts, and they'll have had an emotional reaction. And I think that's quite a good lens, I think, to look at it from, helping people who are maybe engaging in some behaviours that they wish they wouldn't and would like to stop, to think about that. And we all do things that we're not proud of, and some people are just a little bit further down that rabbit hole, I guess. I have another question here, and it is about elder abuse. So elder abuse is something that we do see. Our particular area of work is not specifically about elder abuse. Elder abuse is the more known of the financial abuses, just in the same way that like migrant exploitation is we know that it's out there. We are looking at economic harm in the family violence space because what we know is that people are staying in physically and sexually violent situations because they don't feel like they have a choice to leave because of the financial insecurity. So there's been some research come out of Australia in the last couple of months that has said that it's about a quarter of people say that they don't leave or they go back to abusive relationships because they can't work out how to pay. And the research is called violence or poverty, the choice. So that's
and I would just add to that point that's with our staff member, $20 she was given a week. How would she have ever walked away?
Yeah, and so we know that there's a massive amount of crossover because some of the elder abuse that is happening is also family violence because it's parents and children and things like that. So hopefully all of the things that we have talked about are just as relevant. If you had someone in an elder abuse situation, you might start thinking about someone like age concern when you're thinking about the support pathways that you'd like to provide for people in terms of information. And I'm guessing too with older people, I'm thinking of my nanas, that the age concern will have some specialist advice around people who are confused and memory loss and things like that. So just like you might think, okay, well, this person is a migrant worker from the Pacific, I'm going to give them some information about some of these culturally specific options that they might like to access. The same for elder abuse, that would start factoring into the sort of support that you might offer. I'm so aware of the things I might have tainted my kids with as to the financials. Right. They're in their early 20s. How do I have that discussion? Or are some beliefs left untested? I'm finding it very difficult to facilitate a conversation when I want to answer every question.
Feel free, Nicola. Feel free.
Oh, look, I have always, so my children are 12 and 14. So what I think I'm going to do is different to what I might do. But I've always thought that when they're in their early 20s and before they have dependents and when they've got their life ahead of them, they should be feeling the impact of their decisions or feeling the consequences of their decisions. And so I have always said that my children will have a home to come to, but I will never bail them out of debt, that they will have to access support and budgeting or debt consolidation or whatever it is. So that is absolutely untested, but I do think that for young people, young students, it's a good time to learn when you can actually get yourself out of it. So, Beryl, would you like to add, because your children are past 12 and 14 and you've got...
I was just going to say, I have 3 sons and they are all in their 20s. I guess we were in a really unique position in that I've always loved money and numbers, and 2 of my children are very similar. So from a young age, we've always kind of been really open and talk about the value of money and how it works and calculating this and spending and saving. And right from when they had pocket money, they got a little bit and they would spend some and save some, and they love watching money grow. So it's a little bit easy in that respect because of their personalities. But we just made our conversations about money, the good ones, and the when I say the good ones, it's not that we hid the bad ones or anything, but kind of the sort of conversations that were okay to have in front of the children, that they didn't need to know the full amount of our mortgage and such like, but we would have conversations about money around children so that they could hear how healthy relationships work. They could hear how mums and dads work out things. They could start thinking about the value of money and how hard you have to work for it. And my boys had to pay for their first cars. They had to earn their own pocket money. They all started part-time jobs from about 12 or 13. So we were kind of always in that space.
I think that it's really important to bring it back into the workplace. I think it's really important that we never underestimate our roles as role models. So when we talk in front of our kids about how we deal with money or work with money, and how we speak in front of our staff, we know that violence is a gendered issue, and we know that there are women out there who are suffering abhorrent abuse because they don't feel like they can leave. So think about the jokes we're making about, oh, she spends all my money. This is 2022 in New Zealand, and most households are double income households where everybody's working inside and outside the home really hard. And what we say about, I let her have this in jest is actually quite problematic if you unpack it without wanting to sound too earnest. I think it's important that you talk openly about the different values that people can bring to a relationship. And, oh my God, I'm so lucky I got this promotion because when I go home at night, my husband actually has cooked all of the meals. So that's something that I don't think about. Any stats on the bottom lines for businesses and economic and financial abuse? That's a really good question. We have bottom line stats for family violence as a whole, and I'm not sure. I would think that probably not New Zealand specific, but I know that, that's, sorry, I'm thinking on the spot.
Can I jump in here, Beryl? Beryl, you and I actually had this conversation the other day, and I believe that the number that you were throwing around when we were talking was that family violence across the board is about a $35 million annual cost to New Zealand businesses.
I think, didn't Nicola say that at the beginning? Wasn't it a...
Have I got it written down?
Yeah, I think you did.
My handy notes.
I think you did. I think it was like $350,000 annually or something.
Yeah, it does. It's
350 million annually.
350 million annually. And
Sorry.
Just in terms of addressing whether you've got statistics that's specific to financial and economic abuse, one of the issues is pulling that out as an isolated experience out of the other forms of family violence. It's not only is it tricky to do that, but I think you would end up with some problematic data because people might not identify that they're being economically abused, but they know that they're being psychologically or physically abused. And that's at the front of their mind. They haven't actually, so they're being physically abused and they know that they can't afford to leave, but they still might not have made the connection with economic abuse. And so it does become very difficult in the data set, but we know it's in where other forms of family violence are present, where psychological, sexual and physical are present. The international research says that more than 90% of those cases, economic abuse is there as well. So that's the UK, Australia, the United States, Canada are all aligned with those findings. I'm just going to just give everyone just a second. We're probably pretty much at the end, which looks like good timing. So yeah, just interested in any last questions. Where can you get economic harm training for staff? Well, aren't you lucky you asked, anonymous attendee? Look, specific economic harm training is probably in the family violence space is probably only us, because this is a bit of a new area. We are collaborating with Shine. So Shine provides DV-free workplace TIC training, and we are beginning to work with them to figure out better ways of including that piece of the puzzle. But I think particularly for financial institutions and financial providers, it's a little bit more specific. So we have done specific training for banks and insurers, and I would encourage you to contact us, because your staff are just in a slightly different position in terms of their own well-being, but their ability to impact their clients as well. And we all know that what helps you will have a flow-on effect for your clients. So I'm sure Riss will share our details at the end. So yes.
I'd just like to throw out one other statistic, Nicola.
Okay.
So some research that has been done around employers supporting people in the workplace when people have chosen to speak up about having family violence, 65% of people who have disclosed said that they had a really positive outcome.
That's massive. It disclosed to an employer? To
an employer, and their response from the employer was positive for 65%. So that's a really good insight to the need of employers to be able to have an understanding of economic harm, because for a lot of people because that money and abuse doesn't kind of connect, a lot of these people may not be interested or engaged with places like family violence services. They may just think it's money and relationship problems.
And I think that came up with one of the social workers who has been part of we're launching a snapshot on Thursday of some really exciting actions that people have been doing in this space. And that came up from one of the social workers or one of the refuges, who said that it's such a big leap for people to jump from their relationship with their person they love to family violence. It's not such a leap to jump to, I'm having financial troubles and I need to talk to my bank. So that's where we have a role to play in this work, or going to your employer and saying, I've got some money problems. Any other questions before we head off? Thank you for the link, Riss or Beck, whoever put that in there. That's awesome.
Nicola, may I just reiterate one thing? So I just wanted to you asked me earlier about, part of our takeaways and why we intervened and what we might have done differently or wished we'd done earlier. But what I do want to say is that, and this is, I'm sorry, Nicola and Beryl, because this is what you do and the work that you do is amazing. I'm going to park it to one side for the moment. When it came down to it, as a business owner, it was costing us money. It was costing us tangible money to not intervene. And I would like to say I did it purely because I'm a very empathetic, good-natured person, and it was the right thing to do, but it was costing us money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And look, thank you, Riss and the Financial Services Council. You have huge reach across New Zealand, and we really appreciate your support in helping us get our message out there. And don't be scared to ask your employees if they're okay.
Thank you so much, Nicola. I think that was a really good way to finish up the session. Thank you so much to you, Beryl, and to Katie as well for all the resources and the tools and strategies that you shared today, and for answering all of our questions. I know there were quite a few that came through. As I mentioned earlier, we will share the recording of the session on the FSC's YouTube channel later in the week. So just keep your eyes peeled for that, and we'll pop that up as soon as we can, and then you're free to share it with anyone or rewatch it if you'd like to. And my colleague Rebecca's just popped them in the chat, but we've put up a slide as well. Just a reminder about International Economic Harm Awareness Day, which is later this week on the 26th of November. So if you want to find out a bit more about that or access any of Good Shepherd's amazing resources and the toolkit that Nicola mentioned earlier, go and check out the website. I'd also encourage you to check out the work of Dr. Aisha Scott, who was mentioned today from AUT, who's also joined some of the FSC's previous events. She's done some really excellent research into this space as well. And then a quick one just before we wrap everything up. We've got a few upcoming FSC events, which you are welcome to join us for. We have our end of year functions in Auckland and Wellington on the 1st and the 6th of December. We'll be launching some new research and basically just having some drinks and nibbles. So if you'd like to come and join the financial services community and just have a bit of fun before the holidays, come along and join us. We've just launched Outlook 2023 with the FMA's leadership team on January the 25th. So we're selling tables of 10 at the moment. So if your team is interested in coming along for that, email us at events@fsc.org.nz, or you can jump onto fsc.org.nz to get some more info. And the final event is the Future Ready Advice Summits in February next year for the professional advice community. So this is all about preparing financial advisors and financial advice providers for the new financial advice regime next year and life after licensing. So that'll be one for all the advisors out there listening. Thank you so much again for joining us this afternoon. Nicola, Beryl, and Katie, the work you do is amazing. Thank you for sharing. And to everyone who tuned in, thank you and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.